Welcome to the Impact Learning Visionaries podcast, where we celebrate the unsung heroes of the learning and development industry. As always, we'll be bringing some laughter and a bit of fun along the way, but more importantly, you'll get some incredible insights, key lessons, and unique perspectives on everything related and possibly unrelated to training and development. Let's get this show on the road. Hello everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Impact Learning Visionaries podcast. And today we are joined by Tash Willcocks, who, everything from Dr Seuss quotes to mystical references to the trust triangle and lessons from Lord of the Rings and everything in between. Tash comes with a whirlwind of passion, insight, and energy in every aspect of leadership and leadership development. As a strategic thinking and highly creative designer, Tash knows how to tackle wicked challenges, motivate large groups, encourage reflection, and inspire individuals to perform at their best. She somehow manages to do all of this with a fantastic amount of humor and charm, combined with thoughtfulness and empathy. We need more Tashes in the world. Tash, welcome to the show.
Much. I didn't write that. Who wrote that? That was very flattering.
That's what we do around here. We write awesome stuff.
That's great. Yeah. I'm very open to flattery. Thank you very much. Okay, that was lovely.
Lovely hair today. Yeah. So I think just obviously to jump in is we often talk a lot to people who are at the coalface of learning and development and delivering content, dealing with how to navigate complexities in their environments. And I think we've got a unique opportunity today to actually speak to someone who's very strong on the design side. And a lot of learning and development and understanding how to be successful, I think, revolves around understanding who your customer is and designing around that customer and having that human-centric design. So maybe if you want to start just telling us a little bit about your experience around design and in the learning and development space.
So I'm going to be honest. I never wanted to get into teaching, learning, facilitation. That was never the aim in when I sort of came out of university and my master's. I actually sort of fell into the space and started working at a university. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through sort of 30 years of career here.
That almost never happens. People never fall into learning and development. It's unheard of.
I definitely fell into it. I bumped into it, and basically I had some really nice feedback, and it's going back about 30 years. And it was very much teaching. Digital hadn't really come in, and I really loved it when the students started going, no, that's not right. Oh, my phone says this. And part of me was like, can we not be on our phones all the time? But the other part was like, brilliant. This doesn't have to be one person at the front with the knowledge and sort of saying it at you. And it became with, and I really loved that. And I sort of like swam with it. So I think, even though I was a lecturer and sort of head of some stuff, I always took that quite facilitative learning approach. And with that is understanding the people in the room. Where I really pivoted, so that was graphic design, animation and illustration. Where I really sort of pivoted was when I joined Hyper Island. So Hyper Island is a creative business school, international. I worked on the masters there and sort of helped develop and scale that. That was human-centered design. It was probably the first taste I really got of it and understood it and really dived into it. And that was where I was learning by doing. And super interesting. And it made me really understand the depth of understanding who's in that room. And it doesn't matter if I'm doing a project. I'm working with a really interesting organisation at the moment, so I'm doing trauma-informed facilitation because I'm working with people who have been through trauma. So that is a really, really big learning curve, but I really need to understand the audience. But it's also, I could walk into a room. Last week, I think it was, I was with 200 senior leaders in Scottish Government, very different sort of space. So I need to understand how to work in that space, how to design it so the people in the room can be the best version of them and sort of really thrive, rather than me just going back to that old way of doing it and just talking at them and going, yeah, great job, I'm out of here. It should be something that they're super involved. Adult learning is sort of like people bring knowledge with them. How do you help them become psychologically safe. I know there's a bit of a buzzword, but I really do believe it. Sort of that brave space, as my friend likes to say, and really unpack that knowledge and share and build. I'm there to sort of create the space and the sort of the structure. They're there to rip it open and go, okay, what's happening?
Yeah. I mean, there's two things I want to unpack a little bit there, and let me start with the first one. So I hear this phrase all the time: is you've got to know your audience, right? You've got to understand who the people are in the room and how you can like reach those people and communicate to those people. Not very many people actually explain how you go about understanding your audience. So maybe you've got some thoughts and insights on that.
So you've heard me sort of say two sort of quite different things there. At the minute, I'm running an academy. So I have built and designed with the TPX Impact team an academy that's internal. And the idea is about bridging that gap between, it could be graduates, but it's also, as a parent, I might have been trapped out of the industry. How do we bridge that gap? So we've got that academy. With that, I could spend time really getting to know. There's 10 of them. I can spend a lot of time understanding who they are. They're all very different. Some are sort of like fresh graduates. Some have got sort of 10 to 15 years experience from different spaces. But it was really important. I got to interview them. I got to really sort of understand, get underneath their skin a little bit, understand those needs, explore it. So in that instance, there's a lot you can do to understand the people in the room. I will never understand their full needs. That actually sort of happens as we go along. I've iterated that academy several times because I'm like, okay, I thought it was going to go this way. They're actually all going that way, and that's okay. But the flip side, I mentioned being with 200 people in Scotland. I can't know every single person in that room. I can't sort of have a really deep conversation or interview them. So that's more about really understanding the people that they work with. So the academy that we set that up, so the Scottish Digital Academy, they're incredible. They know the people they're working with. They've met them. They interact quite a lot. They sort of they're embedded in it. So it's a lot of that is working with the team who know them really well. And also, again, I think I hate this phrase, but I'm going to use it. I always plan like a military operation. I would like to come up with something that's not about military, but I like to go in, really plan. So, okay, I feel like I know the rooms, I know the objectives, they've been set. I feel like I understand the needs. But as soon as you get in there, you've got to hold it really lightly. It's almost like a balloon that's really beautifully planned, because as soon as you get in that room, the needs of the people in that room need to be what you concentrate on, and that's where it's just like you have to pivot. So I always say have loads of stuff in your back pocket, and what I mean by that is if you're doing an ideation session and you go in and you're like, okay, I sent out a pre-survey, and that's a lot of the time I send out pre-surveys. I would say always send out a pre-survey. At the bare minimum, what's the accessibility needs? You never ever want to walk into a room or be online and somebody needs closed captions and you don't have access to closed captions, things like that. So pre-survey is lovely. You can find out quite a lot about people in 3 questions. You can also say, you can ask me anything, here's my email. So you've got that pre-survey. But also, I went off tangent and my brain's coming back again. I'm going to blame the cold. So got the pre-survey, you've got that understanding, but as soon as you're in that room, you might go, okay, I thought they were a room of extroverts. That's the impression I got. This is what I thought. And then you realise, yeah, they're very good at talking, but it's not working. That sort of lively, clappy, sort of happy thing isn't working for them. They need a little bit more of a sort of like a little bit of quiet, a little bit of, a silent round robin or something like that. Or there might be a dominant person in the room that you're like, okay, everyone's defaulting to them. So all of a sudden it's like, okay, my plan was this. I thought I understood the needs, but actually it's just going, okay, how can I flip this? How can I make this better for the people in the room?
Sure, I've now gone from 2 questions to 400, but one step at a time. I want to go back and finish the loop on the first set of questions. Is you talked about this kind of concept of psychological safety, and I think people always refer to it in terms of a corporate culture, about if you've got psychological safety, that's your foundation, everything builds off it. But it's interesting that you've brought it up in the sense of a learning space and kind of having that psychological safety. And why I find it really interesting is normally when I think of psychological safety, it's quite a long kind of protracted, careful process and considered process that you do systematically in an organization to start to build that culture. But when you're sitting kind of coming into a space as someone who's going to be doing a learning and development exercise, teaching someone something, you don't have a lot of time. So in that short amount of space, I'm curious as to whether you can share some tips or techniques about how you create that psychological safety.
Yeah, 100%. And I massively agree with you on it's a long thing. You can't just go, hey, we're all psychological safe here. Okay. And that's in the rules. I think there's so many different ways. And I actually do think you can create and I'm going to use the term brave space. My friend Natalia uses the brave space. I think I pinched it off the Imperial War Museum or something. But it's about creating that brave space and it is super, super important, because if you don't create that, people aren't going to relax into the learning. They're going to be in that sort of fright or flight sort of space, or they'll be worrying about what people are thinking of them. So it's super, super important. There's so many ways that I think you can do it, and it is based on the sort of longer term one. And I think it's not the most important. One of the most important is be what you want to see in that room. If I don't just be. I think Amy Edmondson says to create psychological safety, you almost have to just act like it's there. And I feel like I have that slight thing that I walk into most spaces because I really believe most humans are pretty okay. And I'm like, okay, we've got this. So I will sort of hopefully admit that. It's like, I am admitting that you will trust me, you will have that psychological safety with me. I know trust is slightly different, but that you will be in this with me. So that's number one, be what you want to see in the room. And that's like modeling that behavior. Be super curious. If I'm not super curious about those humans, about the thing that we're doing, why would the person that being in the room be curious about it? And it's that curiosity, not just about the subject, but about them as humans as well. And that goes back to that needs. It's like if you're really, really curious, and sort of you can work with the room rather than for the room. So curiosity, being fallible. I'm really clumsy. So if I'm in person, within the first 10 minutes, usually something happens where I walk into something or sort of or I'll say something a bit like meh. And it's just those little small moments of actually me joking a bit. If it's the right sort of tone in the room, I will joke a bit. I will sort of gently mock myself to go, it's all right, we've got this, yeah. As a facilitator, you are sort of that lead in the room because you're the one that has quite a lot of power. But how quickly can I give that power over to them as well? So it's just I'm not running this show, we're running this show. And sort of, invite them in. I could probably go on and on. I'm just going to leave that there because that other stuff will bubble up. But it's the be what you want to see.
Yeah, I love that because I've just as a kind of a side story to that is I've got a friend who's an exceptionally good public speaker. I mean, one of these international speakers, and commands an exorbitant amount of money for his talks. But he teaches people, and one of the first things he always says is, if you aren't there enjoying the talk, how do you expect other people to enjoy your talk? So you've got to actually set the scene. You've got to be the person. If you've got 80% enjoyment, that's the maximum that the crowd can achieve in enjoyment as well. So if you want the crowd to be 100% enthused, you've got to be 100%, and that's how you've got to show up. So it's interesting correlation.
Yeah, and I really do believe in that. And the other thing is, again, I feel like I'm quite privileged in my career. I've got to talk and workshop and facilitate stuff that really excites me. I don't think I've ever had to walk into a room and have to sort of go, oh, well, we're doing X. and not be in 100%. And I don't think I would do that. I think I just go, no, I'm not the right person to do it, to tell the truth. Like, I get to talk about user-centered design. I get to talk about facilitation. I'm still excited about it. Even at that literacy level, I am still excited about it. And some of the courses that I've almost done 10 to 15 times, people are like, you're not bored doing that, is it? And it's like, no, because the people in the room will throw a weird curveball at some point and make me think about it in a completely different room. So I learn something new every time, even though it might be a similar format. And that's that beauty of sort of having adult learners who bring so much to that space, and it's like opening that up. The other thing, just before it pops out of my head, with psychological safety, and I mentioned this before, is that structure. Create the structure, create the boundaries and the sort of like the edges. I'm not going to remember the exact example, but there's this really lovely example about boxing. Like, you can go and you can box, but they know not to hit each other in the face, and that for me is that sort of like, I'm going in fighting again, but you know what I mean? It's like, know the rules. Sports people know the rules and the edges, and if you can give people the edges, and that's even as much as when this is going to end, and I will end on time, you can have structure, but you can have the chaos within, because they know there's those sort of edges around.
Yeah, in boxing, I always thought it was less the face and more the family jewels. That was the unwritten rule.
It's like, do they hit themselves? I don't know. I'm not a massive boxer.
I was going to say, I mean, my boxing instructor never took that rule. I mean, my face was fair game. So, although you do have the padding, so. So just just going back to something else you said, which I thought was really interesting, is we, the world has become very survey centric, right? So like we've got these pulse surveys in the organization where you're constantly kind of checking how things are going, how things are being interpreted. But you've talked about using these surveys as a mechanism to understand your audience and kind of almost know what you're about to get into. And you mentioned, kind of never more than like maybe 2 or 3 questions. So just having done it so many times, can you give some advice on what you think in your experience, the most pertinent, significant types of questions are that you get the most value out of?
Yeah, it does depend on what you're going into. Chris Sutherland, who I work with at TPX, he does a lot of sort of quant work, and it's super interesting. We had a session with him the other day, and he's like, and I really love this, you only when you're sending surveys, you only have the goodwill of the people filling it out, so you've got to get it across as quick and fast as possible. So I always try to keep it 3 questions or 4. The other thing I always go, if you're sending it out by email, I always make it super clear. This will only take about 2 minutes, and make sure it only takes 2 minutes, because a lot of the time this will be going to a busy person who's going to open that and go, oh, I'll do it later if it's more than that. The accessibility is really, for me, it's you have to have that in there. And just keep it really nice and open. Do you have any access needs that can help make a better experience for everybody in the room? Super simple. And I like to keep it quite open. Sometimes I'll put a bit of an example, but I love the fact that, people who do have access needs will get back to you. Also, I had somebody with tunnel vision once, so I had to create a whole mural separate. They were amazing. They actually said, can we have a call? I'm going to set it up. We can sort of like do X, Y, Z. So it's that gentle sort of, can we have a little bit of a conversation? You can gather a lot of information, including people going, I like about 20 minutes for lunch and I like X, Y, Z. So you get sort of different things for that. So that is non-negotiable. The other one, it depends if you need to understand the impact. So a lot of the time I'll put a question in about, how much you know about service design at this point, and, what is your experience of service design? That can help you in lots of different ways. So if I need to put you in rooms, if I know say out of 20 to 30 people, there's 5 people that have got a little bit of experience in service design, and then they've got a bit more of a fluency. I can sort of scatter them out throughout the room. So it's thinking about, how am I going to set the room up that day? How am I going to mix people in different ways? So you can gather information there. It's also, you can do a before and afterwards. If you know the baseline, if you can understand the baseline, you can then track it later. So I've just finished, I think it's cohort 4 or cohort 5 of Topple, and that's in with the NHS. I love this work. It's basically working with doctors and neurosurgeons to think about innovation and sort of user-centered ways and approaches. We do that with them. So you've got this very sort of, at the beginning of the 8 months, you've got what's your understanding of these different areas, and then at the end we do a survey, but we also do it in person when we get to sort of ask questions. We do it where they have conversations as well, so it's not just me filling out 3 questions. That was 2. Trying to think what I'm going to leave you with those 2. Another one might come to me, but so yeah, I think it's really think 3 punchy questions. What do you need to know walking in that room?
Cool. So you talked about service design, and you obviously teach people this concept of human-centered design and design thinking. So what I'm curious about is how you take it's almost like a meta question, right? So you teach design, human-centered design, but how do you take human-centered design into your teaching approach?
I'm going to sound really grandiose now. I think once you sort of understand user-centered design, human-centered design, and I actually think I am still learning all the time. It's sort of, it's bigger than itself, and it's Morpheus, and it sort of grows and evolves, which is a good thing. I think once it's in there, you almost view everything through that lens. So I often talk about, it upsets me when I go into user-centered teams who they're working in that space, and they have so much empathy and so much understanding and care for the users, but not back at their own team. And it's sort of like you see these toxic environments, and I'm like, how can you work like that when you're sort of like that is meant to be that sort of stance? Like, it should be user-centered teams. So when I'm working with the team, I would always approach it with that view. Who are we as a team? How do we set up? And yeah, so with the learning design, everything should have that user-centered approach. And I sort of, we're using the terms user-centered, sort of human-centered, etc., etc. I think I use user-centered a little bit more just because I work a lot in government and healthcare space, and sort of, but I think it's not about the language. It's about sort of, yeah, how you approach it, that lens, that empathy for everybody involved, whether it's front stage or it's backstage in that team, in that organisation.
So if I could just break down into the concept of human-centered design and just try and understand a little bit about your thought process. I mean, generally human-centered design starts with the research phase. It's like the ethnographic research. It's like my favorite quote from Einstein: if I had 20 days to solve a problem, I'd spend the first 19 thinking about it. It's really kind of making sure that before you rush in and solve a problem, you really deeply understand it, and you really deeply understand the people who are experiencing that problem, because sometimes what people tell you is a problem at face value, might not be the actual problem. There might be something deeper seated. And when you're building a course for multiple people, I'm really curious as to, I mean, I can understand that, from product-centered design is like, you go out there, you find the people, you've got the problem, how's your product going to solve the problem, have you solving the right problem? From a service-centered design, there's a specific service, how do you understand the people engaged in that service? In healthcare, it could be, like, how do I make the experience for a chemotherapy patient, better in a cancer ward? And you spend time understanding that and really trying to kind of figure out what that person's feelings are. But when you're designing a course, you're designing something that you're going to be teaching different groups of people from different backgrounds, is there a way of implementing something similar to that ethnographic research process?
Yeah, 100%. So with the academy, and don't get me wrong, I had quite a short window to, because I actually joined TPX Impact about 4 or 5 months before we launched the academy. Well, not before we launched, before we started running the academy. But there's been a lot of thought, and they've done academies before, and they've learnt from that doing. They've learnt from sort of the successes, but also the failures. So I actually inherited a lot of, okay, this is what went right, this is what went wrong. But equally, I've got a big backpack of knowledge of working in this space for a long time, but that's not to say I know all of the answers. Again, it's changing all the time. So the first thing was to go, okay, there is a gap. Why does that gap exist? And sort of like, how do we look at bridging it? But also, I interviewed a lot of people that they'd either done internships, they'd gone and done sort of boot camps, they'd gone and done a 1-day hackathon, they'd, blah, 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 blah. I won't go on listing those, but sort of like spoke to them and went, okay, what I need to understand is, did that bridge, did that help? What did help? What didn't help? What was the reality when you stepped into industry? What were those blockers that stopped you getting into industry? So I spoke to a lot of different people in those spaces to do that bit of research of, okay, how have these things helped? Which ones did create that bridge, but which ones fell short, and why did they? It was just that relentless why. Just why is there this gap? And that was the other thing that I actually went in the other direction as well. And I've grown to love LinkedIn. There was some really interesting conversations on LinkedIn, and I sort of sparked one where I was like, why are there no junior positions within, well, not no, why is there very limited junior positions in government and healthcare in this sort of space? Why is there this gap? We can't keep going. Well, you need a master's, you need to do a PhD, you need this and this. So like, how do we get that experience and that education to match up? So if went and actually spoke to a lot of people in industry as well. So yeah, it was a lot about sort of just understanding that space.
Yeah. And I think you've also kind of alluded to the fact that human-centered design is also a cyclical thing. So
Yeah.
it's that constant, kind of being able to measure, learn and refine, and then obviously adapt. So if we go into that kind of the measure and learn and refine, what are some examples of what you're integrating into your kind of learning experiences that are essentially picking up that data that you use to kind of learn how to refine and adapt?
Yeah, 100%. I'm going to use the academy again, but I'm happy to sort of unpick other ones as well. So we've got 10 people on the academy, as sort of mentioned. They're really different. And initially, I spent the first week, we had them in person, so they're scattered all over the country, and that was part of it. Is like, we want to broaden. We can't just be all pulled in London if we're working with different sort of organisations in different places. So everybody came to the London sort of hub. We had a week. It was a really intense week of me, sort of different members of the TPX team, and those 10 people, quite often in the same room, if I'm honest, but really, really sort of building. And this goes back to that sort of that start of that psychological safety. I needed to talk about feedback, the importance of feedback, how you need to constantly give me that feedback. So a lot of the time, I didn't set up, and now you can do this pulse survey. Would you recommend this course to a friend sort of vibe? Because I know you have to do it sometimes, but I don't always think it adds that much depth. So what I wanted to do is get them to a point where they will feedback. I realise there's a power imbalance. Like, I am leading it. There will be roles at the end of it. They want to go into those full-time roles. So I'm very, very aware of that power imbalance. But the aim was to go, but you need feedback because we are going to run this next year. We want this to be sort of a brilliant experience. I need you to keep sort of feeding back. So there were sort of small moments where they did feedback in one-to-ones. They would message me, etc. And then at the end, we actually did a really great one where, admittedly, they were very honest about what had gone wrong, but equally what had gone right. We did a basic, pretty much a timeline of the 12-week boot camp before they went on to the next bit where they go in with the clients. And I went, rip it apart. What worked, what didn't work. But the first thing I need you to do is really just rip it apart. What would you do if you were redesigning that course? And actually, that was amazing. Like, I was very much like, I want you to give me the toughest feedback because we can only improve if you do that. And they gave me tough feedback. They're brave, they're brilliant, and sort of I think that started in that first week and sort of keeping them going with that. You need to give that feedback. If we don't, we're not kicking the wheels and we're putting a car out there that's going to crash sort of straight away. So, and they were very aware they're the first iteration of this, so they're probably the brave ones that jumped in the pool first. And yeah, I can probably not thank them enough. So I'm going to say it was good, but we're going to make it better.
So I think that was really great because I think it gives us a sense of how that human-centered design now works across from both the kind of understanding going into it, that ethnographic research, how you apply it, but also understanding the full cycle. Now, of course, the other thing I wanted to kind of tackle there is when you're in learning and development, the learners are not your only audience. Often your other audience and the people that in a almost kind of even more challenging way that you've have got to go through this change journey is your stakeholders, and the people who are ultimately I suppose in a typical corporate environment paying your salary, or in other environments are kind of funding the creation of this learning content. And you mentioned a word earlier which we use a lot on the show, is this kind of concept of impact, and what I'm kind of trying to get to the correlation of here is one of the toughest journeys I think that's whether you're in learning or development, or actually almost any role inside an organization, is to be able to market and sell the value and impact you're going to be making in an organization, and understanding who your audience is that you need to essentially get buy-in and win over. And if we take this human-centered design approach and we start to bring it into that space of saying, like almost painting the picture, I'm a new learning and development manager, I've stepped into this new environment, may or may not have been a successful predecessor, or maybe it's like a brand new environment and I'm their first learning and development manager. I guess the question is, what can I start to learn from this human-centered design approach, short of obviously going and doing one of Tash Willcocks' courses, insert cheesy kind of sales pitch here, but short of going on a kind of a full course, what are some of the things that I can learn from human-centered design going into that space, trying to navigate, getting the stakeholders to understand what I'm trying to do, the value of what I'm trying to do, utilizing some of the kind of components of human-centered design.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's really nice because I don't think you've used this term. There's often people, I have a little bit of a beef with it. It's always like, get buy-in from the stakeholders. I'm really anti that. It's just like, if they're buying in, they're not committed. You're sort of almost paying for your time. And I know it's just a tweak on language, but I think it is really important. So basically it's like, how that person will have human needs. Approach that stakeholder and understand what their human needs are. Like, that is a user-centered approach. Like, they are a human. They will be saying no for a reason as well. If they say no, it will be because there's financial implications, because somebody above them is putting pressure on them, because government is about to change and they're a little bit nervous. It looks like a massive risk. So get to know that person and sort of like, what keeps them up at night? Like, really try and understand those stakeholders and sort of, how can you put it in a language for that stakeholder? And this is sort of like, most designers will do this in their day to day. Don't talk jargon at them. Don't talk design. Don't talk learning design. talk in a language. So if they're in finance, learn your numbers, be able to sort of articulate in that way. If they're in a different space, articulate in the way that they will like, right, I'm engaging now. They will step towards you rather than just going away going, I have no idea what they were talking about. What keeps them up at night? Great. How can you help with that? I've been sort of talking a lot about systems leadership. I think that's really sort of important. How do you sort of create that, understand that system, and sort of like get lots and lots of connections? Understand the needs of that system. So I keep doing this because it's like a web. So basically, you are one person in that big web. How do you sort of like the organization as a system? How do you feel the emergent needs rather than the emergency needs? Because training is usually thrown at something because of an emergency, and then it's like, oh, we'll do half an hour on X and it's going to be fixed. No, it's not. We need to do the sort of like what's emergent, and it's not a knee jerk. It's sort of getting there before there's an actual sort of emergency. So I think it's sort of like having that systems leader approach to it. And when I say that, people might be sitting there going, but I'm not a leader. I don't have my shiny gold star saying I'm a leader. It doesn't matter. Everyone should say, if everyone at any point is leading in their space. So how do you create those connections? How do you, and sort of said connections, how do you make friends, not connections? How do you sort of like get to know people? And it's sort of understanding that ripple effect. The last one I'll say on here, because I will go off sort of for about an hour, is show, don't tell. Like, just shine a light. So if quite often in my life I've had, no, you can't do that, or it's not going to work. So I've gone off and I've kind of done it anyway, but in a very small, cheap way. So what's the smallest, cheapest thing I can get out there and prototype and go, look, it worked. That bit didn't, but I've learned, and it's sort of how do you take the risk factor? These are all human-centered approaches. So like, how do you take that risk off? How do you put that small first thing out in the world and be brave yourself to take that risk? And you're going to graze your knees, you are going to fail, they're not all going to be perfect. But if you can go, look, that's worked, we could monetize it, or we could run it internally, it's really going to sort of create learning in this organization. Fantastic.
I mean, something you said there about, focusing on the emergent needs and not the emergency needs was absolutely brilliant. I'm going to use that. Such a great way of explaining it. And you also touched on something else I think is a very important part and it's almost like where human-centered design meets lean is kind of do small little prototypes that you can test and adapt along the way. It doesn't always have to be, oh, I've got to do a course and I've got to now design the entire course and then I can like basically unleash my kind of masterpiece to the world. Sometimes I think that creates as much disappointment with stakeholders as just I mean it is a known issue.
It's also, and this is systems leadership, this is do that small thing. Shine a light and let other people do it for you. If you shine a light and people come towards it going, oh, what's this? I want to get involved. Da, da, da. Let them sort of go and do the talking for you. But if they've had a great experience, they'll go away and go, oh, we came in, we did this. It's really helped my work. Like, it's that small first domino. What's that smallest first domino? And you said it exactly. People try to build a castle rather than a sand castle. Build a sand castle that you can kick over, you can mold, you can sort of like do, it's cheap, it's quick, it's dirty. Don't build sort of, a grand castle that you can't change.
Yeah, and I think one of the analogies I always love it, and I came across this like many years ago, is people often misunderstand what a prototype is. And to use the analogy of a car, a prototype is not the wheel of the car and it's not the steering wheel. The prototype of a car is a skateboard. It's something that actually is fully functional but not as complete. I think a lot of people are going to get confused about that, and they go and they design a beautiful wheel and they think that they've done a prototype, but they're not technically testing the process. So there's one other area of human-centered design which I'm also a very big fan of, and I'm curious to see how it plays out in this world, is of multidisciplinary teams. and having lots of different people with different skills contributing towards an outcome of a service design, a product design. Do you use elements of multidisciplinary teams when you come up and design your courses?
Yeah. So again, I'm in a really I realise I'm in a really special place. So at Hyper Island, we would get industry in and we would be constantly designing with industry. So it wasn't, and do not get me wrong, I think academia is wonderful, but sometimes can be a little bit in an academic bubble. So at Hyper Island, it was very much about sort of going to the source, like what are you doing, how are you doing it. So you had loads and loads of different people coming in throughout the entire course, and they do that across all of them. Then I stepped into Snook, and the beauty of being within an agency and now in TPX Impact is I have a whole organisation of incredibly proactive, bright people who are constantly learning. They know that there's sort of like there's always more out there. So with the academy, I had 50 members of the team involved in that, because I'm there to sort of help facilitate, help with the learning design, but I'm not. I know about design research, but I'm not a design researcher. I'm not a content designer. I'm not an interaction designer. I'm not a delivery. Blah, 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 blah. So yeah, they actually came in. They stepped in. They would create the learning sessions with me. We sort of looked at the whole. So I had sessions with all of them, from the heads to sort of the design leads and sort of people in between, going, okay, we need to do this boot camp. What does that look like from your perspective as a content designer, from your perspective as a service designer? So yeah, they were all very much involved, and then 50 people were involved, from sort of things like buddying to actually delivering the sessions, to stepping in, doing a bit of mentoring, or sort of being in the room to kind of go, okay, do you understand what you're doing on the project, etc. So yeah, that was incredible. Obviously, in a, I'm going to say real world, in a sort of another perspective, you might have a clinician in with you, etc. So we probably didn't have that bit of it, but it was definitely designed with lots and lots of different perspectives. And yeah, I think that was part of the success. Is nobody owned it, we all owned it, and because of that ownership, it was like it really matters for it to grow and thrive. Those 10 people really matter at TPX. Everyone matters. I'm not saying nobody doesn't matter, but like the success for them as individuals, it really matters because we're all involved. It's not me going, it's mine. It's all of ours.
Yeah, and I think there's another part that you picked on, which I really liked as well, is this concept of the multidisciplinary doesn't always need to come from inside the organization. You know, you can also come from outside the organization, and that has value in its own right, because you're constantly bringing information in, you're rejuvenating, kind of the knowledge in the organization. All right, as we're starting to kind of come to the end, I think there's the big question for me is, as someone who is in a learning and design role or in a learning space and hasn't technically come across human-centered design, and I say technically because I think we all do human-centered design. We don't maybe term it human-centered design, but it's we all do it in varying degrees. But as someone who really wants to kind of embrace it in their environment, what do you think would be the first couple of steps that you would suggest to someone like that?
I think we go back to what's the one small thing you could do without taking too much of a risk. So the project that I mentioned before, which I'm about to sort of go into, and again, this is sort of, it's interesting because the project I'm about to step into, which is trauma-informed sort of facilitation, isn't me designing a course. This is me working with the organisation, so sort of in a human-centred way. Don't run into ones like that. Don't take on the big gnarly sort of, people might get hurt one. What's the smallest thing that you could do to go, okay, I'm gonna just put my toe in the water, get feedback, keep sort of going, okay, I've stretched a little bit, get some feedback, ask people, don't just ask your friends, don't just ask the happy person in the room, and then go, okay, I've reflected on that, what's the next stretch space? And sort of just yeah, just keep approaching it like that. Do your research. I think I'm not naive to some, there has been some circumstances where I've had to put a course together quite quickly, and there's, probably not the research that I would have liked to have been in. So sort of Erica Hall is a really good one to look at. It's I think it's just enough research. Like what's just enough, because you could research forever. So what's the amount that you can do? What's within your scope? What's the the risk that you can take that isn't going to put others or you into a sort of bad space? And show don't tell. Just sort of like just go. Okay, I tried this. Kick the wheels on it. And I keep saying kick the wheels. Again, another person, Mike Monterio, says about that. Don't put stuff out in the world until you've had feedback. Get that feedback, get them to kick the wheels, and search for stuff that is. Don't go, this is lovely, tell me it's lovely. Go find everything that's wrong with this and tell me it's wrong, because feedback is so important. If you don't tell me, if you're not honest with me, and don't tell me some of my behaviours are sort of like need improving, or that course didn't work because of XYZ, I can never improve, and you are putting me out in the world where somebody else is probably going to destroy me in a much sort of worse way. So yeah, please tell me what sort of like isn't working, etc. So like feedback really.
Yeah, I mean, that was an interesting insight about the type of feedback you want, and maybe the type of feedback you shouldn't be exposing yourself to as well, which I think was quite an interesting insight. And I guess the final question is, we always ask our guests to share a book, podcast, or something that's happened in their lives recently that has given them a sense of awe or wonder or an aha moment.
So initially, because you did send me that question, I was like, I'm not going to tell you. You should go out and find yourself. It's all about ruthless curiosity. And I really believe in that. Just be ruthlessly curious about everything around you. But then on the train the other day, I was listening to a podcast, so I have written it down, about AI. Where is it? Your Undivided Attention. So it's by Asa, I've forgotten their surname, and Tristan Harris. So Asa created the doom scrolling and realizes he's got a lot to answer for, and Tristan was at Google in the ethics space. But they've done this really, really interesting podcast with Emerald about what myth can teach us. So it's storytelling, it's myths, it's AI, it's the Sorcerer's Apprentice. And my brain just went, oh, because I go between, oh no, AI is going to destroy the world, climate, it's really bad for sort of climate change, etc., to it's going to save us all. It's got so many great things. And I think learning, there's so much opportunity within the learning space for AI to really push that. We've been just shoving stuff online and self-serve. People don't finish it, but AI, learning with the AI, getting that very curated experience, asking questions. So anyway, Your Undivided Attention with Emerald, the myth of teaching. But they also spoke about The New Fire by I think it's Buchanan, which is amazing as well. So there's those two things. The other thing that keeps popping in my head is Digital Darwinism by Tom Goodwin. That's a really fantastic book. And The Coming Wave, which is by the person's name has got out of my head, but they founded DeepMind. So that's where my brain is at the minute, but that's probably because I was on a train for quite a long time, so you've just got... I have the attention span of a squirrel, so I was reading all of those and listening to the podcast at the same time. However, my main thing is just be ruthlessly curious about everything around you. Don't just read design books. Don't just read learning design books. Don't just read, watch stuff, speak to people. Yeah, so just that's what I'd love to leave, is just be ruthlessly curious.
On that note, Tash, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a fascinating dive into the world of human-centered design and just understanding how it can correlate and translate into the learning and development. And I think you've shared some incredible insights, and I really want to thank you for all of your valuable wisdom.
I hope it was valuable wisdom. I'm going to do that thing where I'm like, It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, Jason. Yeah, and really, yeah, you've got me thinking. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hey, thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Impact Learning Visionaries. If you found it interesting or helpful, please subscribe by clicking on the button down below so you don't miss our next one. Also, be sure to check out our Reality Bites blog for more information on how technology is aiding in learning development. Links are all in the description below. Go check it out. Thanks a lot. Bye.